hotly contested congressional race between Ben McAdams and Burgess Owens. We'll start with Pat and then get into what's happening in what appears to be the most hotly contested race in Utah this political cycle. Pat, thank you so much for coming on today's show. You've had an interesting past month or so. You drew a cartoon that was published in the Salt Lake Tribune that depicted a law enforcement officer going into the doctor. The doctor is showing him an x-ray in which inside of the officer who's in that office, he has like a hood. It's like shows him as though he's a member of the KKK. And on the back of his jacket, it said law enforcement. And the response to that was quite extraordinary, actually. I think from both sides of the political debate. I mean, there were a lot of people I saw who were fierce advocates for what you drew. And fierce defenders, and then obviously there were a lot of detractors that even led to a protest of the Salt Lake Tribune's printing place. I believe. Were you? I can't imagine you were too surprised by the reaction you received to that cartoon, were you?
Yeah, I was because when I did the cartoon, well, first of all, when I do a cartoon, I have to think, what do I want to comment on? And in this case, I was commenting on white supremacy infiltrating law enforcement, which is just a fact. It's been happening. But I wanted to avoid painting all policemen with the same brush, tarring all police with the same brush. And so I thought, how do I accomplish this? And I make white supremacy something that is apart from the police. It's something that is afflicting the police. It's kind of like a disease, right? I mean, if you get COVID, you're not COVID, you just have it and you want to get rid of it. And so that was the idea behind the cartoon, is that this policeman finds out and he's a little shocked that this is an issue with him. A lot of the criticism said that the cartoon was painting all police as racists. And that's absolutely not what the cartoon says.
Can you see how some may have interpreted it that way, or you don't think that's valid at all?
Oh, it was visceral, the way they reacted. And I think the reason for that is that police feel incredibly under siege. They feel under the microscope. But if you actually look at the cartoon, like I've explained it, it's a disease. It's not the police. It's something that is afflicting policing.
And I also think your job is to provoke conversations. I don't know if you agree with that, but it kind of is to, in some way, get some sort of reaction. Do you view your job that way?
Well, when I did the cartoon, when I do any cartoon, I have to be able to defend it. I have to think ahead and think, what do I say if somebody comes back at me?
Because I had, and not to interrupt that, but I had the lieutenant governor on this show last week, and I asked him about your cartoon, and he said your intention was clear to him, that you were intentionally painting all law enforcement as members of the KKK and white supremacists. He called you an idiot, I believe, and said that you should apologize and that you haven't.
Well, Spencer Cox is deliberately misinterpreting the cartoon. He just wants to take a swipe at me.
I should have a full disclosure here. I'm on the Tribune. The Tribune's now a 501c3 nonprofit. I'm one of the board of directors. This issue and this cartoon actually reached the board. And like, hey, did everybody notice it? Not that we would do anything, because the board, doesn't get involved in the content and what's published on the Salt Lake Tribune, but a sense of like, should we respond here? What is our role here? It actually produced a lot of interesting conversations on the role of the local newspaper, what a newspaper should look like in 2020. That extended it well beyond even your cartoon, which I found really fascinating. But my response to the cartoon itself, as a board member of the Salt Lake Tribune, is this is what Pat does. Do you view your role to spark conversations and debates like the one that one sparked?
Oh yeah, absolutely. A cartoon is supposed to inform. It's supposed to educate. Low down on the list is it's supposed to entertain. But I also try to persuade people to, see things my way.
I believe there are a large swath of folks who don't understand the difference between you and reporters.
Well,
and
that's true.
how,
I mean, no question. And there are people who should know better who don't understand the difference.
or
You
they
ask,
know the difference and they intentionally conflate the two, correct?
oh yeah, hmm
So
yeah.
how do you combat that?
Well, you just tell the truth. Oh, George Orwell said, in a time of misinformation, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. So all that you can really do is tell the truth, be honest, be straightforward. Uh, just, lay the cards out as they are.
I want to ask you too this because the Salt Lake Tribune is the first major newspaper in the country to be a nonprofit and to go to nonprofit status as a 501c3. That's a recent development, just the beginning of this year that really went into effect. As I mentioned, I'm on the inaugural board, but there will be board members beyond me, and the Salt Lake Tribune will outlast both of us. Hopefully, do you believe that's true? What do you think the future of the Salt Lake Tribune is?
Nobody really tells me a whole lot about what's going on in the upper reaches of management. But the Salt Lake Tribune is necessary. The Salt Lake Tribune was instituted 150 years ago as a counterweight to the church. And you need that voice, even now, to provide news. My grandfather used to get the Deseret News and the Tribune because he said, I wanted to get the Deseret News for church news and I want to get the Tribune for the facts.
This is kind of my point overall as I think about the future of the Tribune and really the future of local newspapers and journalism in the future. And you're seeing what's happening across the country. You must be concerned about that, as I am. How many local newspapers are folding, how many journalists are losing their jobs across the country, and thinking about the role of the newspaper in 2020, the role of local journalism in 2020, and whether or not we should have partisan newspapers on either side, or whether we should have news organizations that just lock arms with the community and tell their stories and help them, communicate their concerns to those in power. It does seem as though, I think you would agree with this, and you kind of just said it, that the Salt Lake Tribune views itself as kind of like a left-leaning counter to the Deseret News.
Not exactly what I said.
Oh yeah, but well, correct me where I'm wrong there.
Okay, the Salt Lake Tribune is not an organ of a church or a political party or of some other vested interest.
Right.
It is a newspaper which is dedicated to getting local news, informing the public. That's just what we do. Some people view us as being left-leaning. The reporters, when they cover a story, they do their best to be objective and to get you the facts. A lot of people think that's left-leaning. Who is it who said truth has a liberal bias?
You don't view it as left-leaning.
Oh, the reporting that we do?
The Salt Lake Tribune as a whole, as an institution.
I think the editorial page is a little left of center, just a little bit. But the news side, no, there is no political bias.
With so much controversy and everything seemingly on fire all over the place, both within the state of Utah and, we're 43, 42 days away from an election as you and I are talking. How do you choose every day what you're going to draw and what the focus of that cartoon is going to be? Like, how do you pick just one thing?
Well, it is like drinking from a fire hydrant. I'm mostly here to cover local issues. I could do a cartoon about Trump every single day, but I'd rather do a lot of issues where it will have an impact on the local community. And like I said before, I think about things and I think I should be commenting on this. How do I want to approach it? What do I want to say about it?
How do you think, as someone who's following the news closely and commenting on it through your cartoons, that the state of Utah has done in response to COVID-19?
Well, early on, Utah was lucky, and we had kept the numbers down. We crushed the curve, and I think we spiked the football too early. And there was a lot of pressure from business interests to open up. And so they did. And what we have now is 1,000 people a day reporting being infected with coronavirus.
A coronavirus, right? How do you think something like that becomes political locally? I hear what you're saying around
Mhm.
Trump making it political nationally, but how does that get politicized locally? I mean, we're even seeing it in the difference of the counties that border each other between Utah County and Salt Lake County, and their responses have been vastly different. So even at like a very, very local level, it seems like a pandemic, a coronavirus, right? That politicians can't control. I mean, there's no sides. Nobody's pro coronavirus, I would hope. So how does it become political?
Well, that's when it becomes a pandemic. They get bad information and they just run with it. It's somehow become a political statement to wear a mask or not wear a mask. And I think pretty much anywhere else in the world, it's not political. It's, if you want to crush the curve of this disease, you have to wear a mask. You have to be respectful of others. You got to do social distancing, wash your hands, all those things. It's a disease. It doesn't care what politics we have. It doesn't care if we're a Democrat or a Republican.
I do wonder. I know that you have, following the law enforcement cartoon that caused controversy, again, caused protests, has caused, a lot of, the Speaker of the House rebuked you here in the state of Utah. A lot of, various officials. I know that you have met with law enforcement since that cartoon was published. How have those conversations gone?
Oh, it's very well. I was contacted by Bruce Champagne, what great name, of the Utah Peace Officers Association. And he was part of the organization who decided not to issue some kind of statement. Instead, they thought they would talk to me. So we had a conversation, and I explained that the cartoon was not about all cops, that it's not saying that all cops are racist. And then we had him on just yesterday on Trip Talk. And, we kind of talked about this too. And I was able to issue a statement through his organization saying, this is what I was thinking, this is why he did it.
You are such a major figure in the state of Utah. And again, I see you as an institution within the Salt Lake Tribune. You've been there for so long. And I know that you think about each cartoon and kind of, being able to defend it. But do you think of kind of the power that you hold personally, even beyond the Salt Lake Tribune, to shape a narrative and to shape a conversation? And does that weigh on you at all? Or do you view that as something that you just have to set aside and draw what you feel is appropriate?
Well, if I'm doing that national cartoons, I'm just another pebble in a landslide. I'm not going to make that much difference. But if it is a local issue, then yes, I have an opportunity to make a change.
Keep striving for it, my friend. Keep doing what you're doing. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about that, cartoon that caused so much controversy with law enforcement. I just personally appreciate you being willing to talk to law enforcement. I know that, no one within the Salt Lake Tribune mandated that you do any of this. And so the fact that you've taken this up on your own is fantastic. And again, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your views with our audience.
Well, it's been a lot of fun, Clint. Take care.
Tanner, thanks so much for coming on. You've had an interesting week. You've had an interesting past few months, to be honest. Utah County seems to continue to make national news. And as a lifelong Utah County resident, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about some of the news we're making. I do know that Utah County is better than Salt Lake County. I think you agree with that. And so, any of the Salt Lake County people who attack us for making national news, just remember we're always going to be better than Salt Lake County. But this week you announced a mask mandate, you and Nathan Ivey, as well as the Utah Department of Health, if I'm not mistaken. Tell us about your mandate and why you felt it was appropriate.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me on, Clint. This was an interesting, obviously it's been a process, like you said, the last few months, not just eventful for Utah County. This has been a crazy time for all of us, throughout the country. And, I think in the county, we've been following the data the whole time. We've been trying to figure out the best way to manage this. And I've really looked to the state task force. I feel like they have always really prioritized both things. One of the things I've appreciated is they've never set the goal of having 0 cases of COVID-19. That would be, an unrealistic goal. They tried to balance kind of the economic issues here and the human and health issues. And fortunately, throughout this crisis, we've had one of the most healthy economies and the lowest level of hospital utilization. And I think that's a fairly good place to be. And, we had a post kind of Memorial Day spike. And at that time, really everyone in the community doubled down on the emphasis of wearing masks. I was a big supporter of it at that time. The whole point is if we're going to reopen and resume activities, we need to be wearing a mask. And, we had our religious organizations and business community all come in and support that. But really the state task force, even at that time, did not push us to make a mask requirement. And so we've been following the data, and really throughout this whole time, Utah County has not had a disproportionate number of cases despite our different approach here compared to, for example, Salt Lake County. And so they've really maintained a lot of credibility, at least in my eyes, of not necessarily overreacting and trying to balance this. But really this most recent spike over the last few weeks is very concerning. And when all of the members of the task force reiterated that to us, and we saw that our rate was 5.4 times greater than the rest of the state, that's the first time where the data suggested we needed some immediate intervention. And the hospital community were asking us to do so. And so I was happy to jump in and issue this call to action for our entire community.
What do they attribute Utah County's spike to?
Well, there's no question that two major events happened kind of leading up to this spike, right? We have large families in Utah County and sending all of our kids back to school K through 12. And the associated extracurricular activities that tend to happen when you do that. And then secondly, of course, two major universities of all the college age kids coming back into town, living in close quarters, relying on common facilities for their day-to-day life. That's going to have an impact. So I think that is a major contributor, and the data is, but I think one thing that's important that they point out is it's not isolated there. And that's the biggest problem is, yeah, are younger kids healthy and maybe they're not going into the hospitals as much and not having severe symptoms? Absolutely. But unfortunately, we are already seeing it spread out of that demographic group into the entire county, outside of Provo and Orem, into the older demographic. And that's where it's incredibly concerning because, that could start to put some pressure on our hospital system.
Could they possibly be responsible for the spike and warrant the type of coverage they're receiving currently, or is it kind of everything that we just mentioned?
I think it's everything. When I speak to the state task force, they're not singling out a particular group. I think that Kwaku, because he made some particular kind of statements, after being singled out, I think he naturally made some statements that kind of drew more attention. And then I think the name, which they obviously have had for much longer than this pandemic, I think, kind of drew some more attention, being young and dumb. But I think that it is an example, though, of the types of activities. I've spoken with Kwaku, and he was very reasonable in this conversation with me. And really, he kind of pointed out some other social events that are surrounding the universities that could be contributing to this as well. And it's so there's a lot of it, but we do need to draw attention to that. I think that the universities initially had a great plan to control their learning environments. And that's kind of because that's what they can influence most directly. And then they quickly kind of realize that, okay, that once the kids are out of class, they've got to live, and it's not just people being reckless. I mean, it's just hard. When you're in a situation where you're used to eating in a cafeteria every day and all of a sudden that changes, and your entire kind of social structure is different. And so we've got to do a better job of providing those resources so that they can have safe opportunities. But those kind of off-campus social gatherings of college-age students is certainly a major contributor, and why we're really trying to get through to that demographic that says, hey, we've got to wear masks, we've got to physically distance, because this spike can have some negative consequences.
What if Utah County's COVID-19 rates continue to rise, even with the mask mandate? What's on the table at that point?
Well, I mean, we all just need to continue to manage this. Now, case counts, again, we have to look at the data in totality. Case counts are just one part of it. And I know that one of the interventions right now is that we're going to focus on providing more testing and trying to shorten the lines with testing. And so we could see case counts spike, but we got to make sure that we're looking at the rate of growth, that we're looking at the positivity rate, hospital utilization. That is the one where we don't want to get close to, right? And actually right now we're not. It's just that these case counts on the front end are suggesting that if this were to continue, it could have a material effect on our hospital utilization. So right now, only Provo and Orem have gone to the orange level. The governor has suggested that if we don't see some improvement, that orange could go countywide. I think that would be the first intervention. There are other ways to dial it back, and we've all been through it, and we hope we don't have to go backwards. But really, I think we are focusing on that hospital utilization number, and we've just got to protect our healthcare workers in that capacity, especially as we go into the colder months, where there's likely going to be an uptick in utilization for other reasons and for other illnesses. And so we're going to be watching that very carefully, and that's why I just hope that all of us as a community, regardless of maybe how you feel about this requirement or other things, you'll wear your mask, you'll physically distance, you'll make responsible decisions, and try to slow this as soon as we can.
Tanner, thank you so much for coming on, my friend, and we'll have you on again soon, I'm sure.
Hey, good to be with you, Clint.
Congressman, thank you so much for coming on today's show.
Good to be with you, Clint. Thanks again for having me back.
Tell me what's going on up in Washington, D.C. right now. What's the mood?
I'll tell you both good and bad. I think for me on some of the legislation I've been working on personally, it's actually been a really great week. On Monday, I passed a bipartisan bill that I've been working on with Representative Anthony Gonzalez out of Ohio. It's called the Stifle Act. And what the Stifle Act does is it works to protect victims from illegal trafficking. So what we're doing, Anthony Gonzalez and I are both on the Financial Services Committee. So what we're trying to do with this legislation is to target the transnational financial networks, some of these dark markets where money will flow. And there's one thing that all types of trafficking have in common, whether it's human trafficking, drugs trafficking, wildlife, organ trafficking, and that's they have to use some of these illicit financial networks to move money around. And so we are going to be working with federal governmental financial institutions and banks and others to help to identify some of the patterns in trafficking, and then by doing that, hopefully shut down some of the trafficking. So I think this will be a valuable new tool for law enforcement to help to stop illegal trafficking and to target the dark markets. I passed a bill yesterday to work on bringing down veteran suicide. So, one of the things we know is we're starting to understand suicide risk and what puts somebody at a disproportionate risk of death by suicide. That, certainly there are factors we're all aware of, trauma, substance abuse, behavioral and mental health, but there are other factors that seem to be at least correlating to some extent that we don't understand well. Altitude seems to be correlated with higher suicide risk. Air pollution are things that seem to be correlated with higher suicide risk. So I just passed legislation to direct the National Institutes of Science and Health to study and to help us better understand how altitude contributes and in what way it may contribute to a veteran's risk of suicide, and hopefully to bring down risk of suicide for our veterans. And then I introduced legislation, it's called the Faith in Congress Act, trying to restore what's broken about Washington. And it does certain things like takes away this automatic pay increase for members of Congress, which I think is ridiculous. I would actually prefer to, if Congress can't do basic things like pass a budget, keep the government open, Congress doesn't deserve a pay increase by no means. And so it's to end this practice of automatic pay increases. And I rallied people in this Congress to stop the automatic pay increase and I don't think Congress has earned a pay increase, so we stopped a pay increase at Congress. But we should never be on autopilot. Things like no budget, no pay. That if Congress doesn't adopt a budget, they shouldn't get a paycheck at all. Banning things like first class travel, that members of Congress can't travel at first class, a ban on lobbying by former members of Congress, and then really to put bipartisan bills where people are coming together, like Representative Gonzalez and I did on this anti-trafficking bill, that you get kind of a bonus. Those bills go to the front of the line in consideration, and really want to encourage people working across the aisle, finding bipartisan sponsorship of bills, and that when you do that, it's an added benefit. So those are some of the things we're working on to fix a broken Congress. I said it was kind of a mixed week. So while on some of the legislation I've been working on, it's been a good week. I just have to say that I'm frustrated overall that Congress, again, we passed a continuing resolution this week to avoid a government shutdown. But that is really just doing the bare minimum. A continuing resolution is to just extend the current budget through the end of the budget year and into the future, but it's not passing a budget. It's not being deliberative and deciding where we're spending, what our priorities are. It's to continue momentum of the past into the future. And so we passed a continuing resolution. Yay us, we didn't shut down the government, but it really is kind of rock bottom of what we should do, and it's punting on not passing a budget. So that's disappointing to me. And it looks like there's not going to be a deal this week on a COVID package, as the country is suffering, as Utah is seeing our case numbers increase with COVID, and a lot of hardship on small businesses and startup businesses and struggling families to get through this crisis economically and health-wise. Congress failed to come together in a bipartisan deal to implement a plan to slow the spread of the virus and to help give a lifeline to people who are really struggling right now.
What's the holdup there on the COVID-19 relief bill?
I think the holdup's a couple of things. First of all, I think in classic Washington fashion, the debate has centered around the House. The House passed the HEROES Act in May, and it was a $4 trillion package. The Senate actually has not passed anything, but they've been talking about a $500 billion package. And so the holdup seems to be a debate about how much we're going to spend. And look, I see both sides of the argument, to be honest. If we don't stabilize our economy and give businesses what they need and families what they need to get through this crisis, there's not going to be an economy to stimulate once the virus is behind us, once we have a cure, once we have a vaccine. There's not going to be an economy to stimulate. The last thing we want is to have a vaccine and be to the point that we're ready to put the virus behind us and find boarded up shop windows, bankrupt businesses, and sky high unemployment. That is going to be really bad for the national debt if the economy goes off a cliff. But at the same time, that shouldn't be an excuse to spend money wildly. Anything we spend today, somebody's going to have to pay for it. I think it's going to be us, and it's going to be our kids that are going to have to pay for that. And so we should do what we need to do to get through this crisis, to both manage and slow the spread of this virus, and then to give a lifeline to small businesses and families that are struggling, so we can get through this crisis. But we shouldn't do everything. We should do what we need to do, but we shouldn't be throwing money at everything. And so I thought that the $4 trillion package was too much. I actually voted against my own party and voted against that bill when it passed in May. But doing nothing is, I think, just as bad as spending $4 trillion. Congress needs to come together. We need to find middle ground and to get a deal done. And we haven't done that. And again, another week goes by when I think Washington has failed the American people, and that's disappointing to me. I joined with a group of Republicans and Democrats. The problem solvers is what we're called. We worked together to try and break this logjam. The problem solvers put together a package that was in the middle. It actually just got ignored kind of by both sides. For those who want a $4 trillion package, they said it was too little. For those who want a $500 billion package, it was too much. I think we need to stop debating a number, and the path forward for me is to come around a plan and to say, okay, our goals are to slow the spread of the virus and stabilize the economy. Everybody agrees on that. Republican, Democrat, House, Senate, we agree that that's what we need to do. What is the plan? Give me a dollar amount, give me a plan and tell me what the elements of the plan are, and then tell me what it's going to cost. And we may decide that we can't afford this, but this is critical. We have to afford that. But let's start with a plan and then look at the price tag with, always keeping in mind that we have to act in a fiscally responsible way, both to stabilize the economy, but not spending too much, and move forward with the plan in that sense. And I just think that we're having the wrong debate, as Washington often does, and then finding ourselves in gridlock and frozen and not able to do anything. And I think it's really frustrating and something I'm really disappointed about. I think we should do better. And Problem Solvers put a plan on the table. That's a group that I work very closely with, and applaud them for at least trying to break the logjam. There were things I didn't like in even the Problem Solvers plan, but at the end of the day, we got to work together. We got to move forward, and we got to find something that we can all agree on, and we can get to the president's desk for a signature.
Another thing you mentioned, the debate raging up there in DC. Another thing that's caused that is the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Our senator and your colleague, Mitt Romney, kind of officially stated this week that he would push forward with a vote for the nominee that Donald Trump puts forward, President Trump puts forward. We're recording this on a Thursday. It appears that President Trump is going to make that announcement of who his pick is on Saturday. So when people are watching this on Sunday, they'll already know who the pick is. So how do you feel? And obviously the House doesn't have a role in this process, but overall, how are you feeling about the passing of Justice Ginsburg and the debate that it's kicked off?
Yeah, well, let me just first say, so I finished work last night, finished in my office about 9 p.m., and I left to walk home to my apartment. And I went a little bit out of my way and walked past the Supreme Court, and there were lines blocks long of people going to pay their respects to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I think, let me just pause before we talk about the politics of it to just say that Justice Ginsburg lived an amazing life. She lived a life of dedication and commitment. She made a lasting mark on the court and a lasting mark on an entire generation as a husband and a father to a daughter and an amazing woman, a husband to an amazing woman, and a father to a teenager who's trying to find her place in the world. To have somebody like Justice Ginsburg they can look up to, who rose to the highest levels of our government and lived an admirable life and provided service. Whether you agree or disagree with her, she was an amazing person. I'm happy and thankful for her contributions, and our nation mourns her passing. So as you know, and I'm sure your listeners know, the House doesn't have any role on whether to vote to confirm federal judges and Supreme Court justices. That is entirely something that the Constitution has delegated to the president to nominate, and then the United States Senate to confirm. So the president has a constitutional prerogative to nominate a justice, and he will do that by the time this podcast is made public. And the Senate then is going to have to decide whether or not to confirm that nominee. So, I think there are two questions in that. The first question is, do they do it before the election? And that seems to be, there seems to be a sufficient number of senators who have said yes, they are ready to do that before the election. And the second question is the person who the president qualifies, the person who the president nominates qualified for the job? And that's an important function of the United States Senate, to vet a candidate, to interview a candidate, and then to make that determination. So, Senator McConnell previously said that it was a bad idea to confirm a Supreme Court justice in an election year. Obviously, he's changed his mind on that. But we're gonna have to see how this process plays out. And I think our senators are now will have the task of vetting a justice and voting whether or not to confirm.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm sure we'll have you on again, and good luck out there on the campaign trail. Thank you for tuning in. Please reach out to us at stateofutah@siliconslopes.com with any feedback or suggestions or guests you'd like to see on the show. We want you to think of this as your show, as that's how we think of it. Signing off this Sunday, my name is Clint Betts. Thank you for watching and have a good week.